The story of the Torah begins on a mountain called Sinai, where Moses stood with a crowd of people who had just escaped from Egypt. According to the ancient text, the voice of God rose from the clouds and gave a set of instructions that would become the core of Jewish life. The Torah is not only a record of past events. It is meant to be a guide for how to act, how to think, and how to relate to the world. In this way, the Torah is like a family rule book that tells a child when to go to bed and reminds a community to keep the streets clean. When a parent tells a child that bedtime is at 8 o'clock, the rule is not just a suggestion. The parent expects the child to follow it, because the rule protects the child's health and helps the family run smoothly. In the same way, the Torah gives a set of rules that protect the spirit and the community. The bedtime rule is simple, but it carries a purpose: rest, growth, safety. The Torah's laws also have purpose. They tell when to pray, how to treat a stranger, how to keep food clean. Each law is meant to shape a life that is balanced and respectful. A community rule about recycling works in a similar fashion. The rule says that plastic, paper, and glass must be sorted and placed in the right bins. The rule is not there to make life harder. It is there to protect the environment, to keep the town clean, and to teach people to think about the future. The Torah's laws work like that rule. They ask people to think beyond the moment, to consider how actions affect others and the world. The idea that the Torah is a guide for living is built into the very way the laws are presented. Moses is the central figure in this story. He is described as the man who climbed the mountain, listened to the voice, and brought the words back to the people. The text says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them that I am the Lord your God." Exodus 21. Moses is not only a leader, he is the link between the divine voice and the human community. He receives the law, writes it down, and teaches it. Because of Moses, the law is seen as coming from a source beyond human imagination. Later thinkers built on Moses' role. Maimonides, a medieval philosopher, wrote that the commandments are a way for the mind to understand God's will. He said that the law is a map that helps a person find the right path. Rashi, a famous commentator, explained each verse in a way that connects the ancient words to everyday life. These thinkers show that the idea of divine law has been examined and explained many times. They all agree that the law is more than a list of rules. It is a living guide. One argument for seeing the Torah as a guide is that it covers all parts of life. It tells how to behave in a market, how to treat a neighbor, how to raise children, and how to pray. Because the law touches on so many areas, it feels like a manual for daily living. Another argument is that the law is meant to be timeless. The text says, "These are the statutes and the judgments which the Lord made known to the children of Israel." Exodus 24:12. The word forever appears many times, suggesting that the law is meant to stay relevant. However, there are people who argue that the law is too rigid. They say that a set of rules written thousands of years ago cannot fit the modern world. For example, a law that requires a specific type of offering in a temple seems out of place when most people do not have a temple. Critics point out that strict adherence can lead to conflict when new situations arise, such as modern technology or new social norms. They ask whether the law can bend enough to meet new challenges without losing its core meaning. Another criticism says that the Torah is simply a cultural tradition, not a divine instruction. This view sees the laws as the product of ancient societies trying to keep order, rather than messages from a higher power. From this angle, The rules are like any other set of customs that change over time. The critics argue that if the law is only a cultural artifact, then it can be replaced when it no longer fits the community's needs. Both criticisms have been answered by scholars and religious leaders. In response to the claim of rigidity, many point to the concept of interpretation. The law is not a static stone. It is a living conversation. Rabbis throughout history have taken the written words and applied them to new situations. For instance, the question of using electricity on the Sabbath was addressed by looking at the principle behind the law, not just the literal wording. This shows that the law can adapt while staying true to its purpose. In reply to the cultural tradition argument, the text itself claims a divine origin. The famous declaration, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," Deuteronomy 6:4, is repeated in prayer every day. The repetition reinforces the belief that the law comes from a source beyond human invention. Moreover, the experience of the giving at Sinai is described as a direct encounter with the divine, something that cannot be reduced to mere culture. Historical anecdotes give weight to these ideas. In 1947, a group of Bedouin shepherds stumbled upon a series of ancient scrolls in caves near the Dead Sea. The scrolls, now known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, contained copies of parts of the Torah that were older than any known manuscript. The discovery showed that the text had been carefully preserved for centuries. It also demonstrated that the community that kept the scrolls treated the words as a guide for daily life, not just a story of the past. Another episode took place in the late 1st century CE, when scholars gathered at a place called Jamnia. The Council of Jamnia, as it is called, discussed which books should be part of the official collection of Scripture. The meeting was not about making new laws, but about confirming which texts were already accepted as divine. The fact that the community felt the need to protect and define the canon shows how seriously they took the idea that these words were more than history. They wanted to keep a clear guide for future generations. These stories illustrate how the Torah has been treated as a living guide across time. The scrolls and the council both emphasize preservation and careful handling of the text. They also hint at the deep respect that the community has for the idea that the law comes from a higher source. The idea of divine law also shows up in everyday moments. Imagine a parent who tells a child to say "thank you" after receiving a gift. The child learns to recognize gratitude, a value that shapes how they treat others. In the same way, the Torah commands people to give charity, to welcome the stranger, and to treat the poor with kindness. These commands are not abstract ideas. They become habits that shape a community's character. A modern example can be seen in the practice of Shabbat, the weekly day of rest. The law says that work should stop from sunset on Friday until nightfall on Saturday. For many families, this means turning off electronic devices, sharing a meal, and spending time together. The rule creates a rhythm that separates the busy week from a time of reflection. Even people who are not religious can see the benefit of a regular pause, similar to a weekly family night. The law, then, becomes a tool for mental health and family bonding. Another contemporary illustration is the law about keeping kosher, which tells what foods can be eaten and how they must be prepared. Some see it as a restriction, but many families treat it as a way to bring awareness to what goes into the body. The process of checking ingredients, separating meat and dairy, and saying a blessing before eating makes the act of eating a mindful practice. In this way, the law guides daily habits toward mindfulness and gratitude. Modern interpretations often use the language of values, rather than rules. A scholar might say that the law encodes values like justice, compassion, and humility. By focusing on the value behind a command, people can apply it in new contexts. For example, the command to not bear false witness can be understood as a call for honesty in all communication, whether it is a courtroom testimony or a social media post. This shows how the ancient law can speak to modern life. In later sections of the video, the discussion will move to how these values shape ethical decisions and how prayer connects the individual to the divine. The link between law and ethics is clear. The law gives a framework, and ethics fills in the heart. Prayer, meanwhile, is the way people talk to the source of the law, asking for help to follow it. The idea that the law, ethics, and prayer form a triangle will be explored later. To make the concept clearer, an analogy can be used. Think of a garden. The Torah is like the garden's fence. The fence defines the space, keeps out unwanted animals, and guides the gardener where to plant. The plants inside the fence represent the actions of a person. The gardener's skill and care are like the ethical choices a person makes. The fence does not tell the gardener exactly how to prune each rose, but it sets the limits that protect the garden. In the same way, the Torah sets the limits that protect a community while allowing room for personal growth. A second analogy compares the law to a recipe book. A recipe tells what ingredients to use, how much, and how to combine them. It does not force a chef to cook the dish exactly the same way every time. The chef can add a pinch of spice or adjust the cooking time, as long as the core ingredients remain. The Torah gives the core ingredients: love for God, love for neighbor, respect for life, and the method of combining them. Each generation can adjust the cooking method to fit the kitchen they have, but the basic recipe stays the same. Quotes from the original text reinforce the idea that the law is meant for daily life. In the book of Leviticus it says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Leviticus 19:18. This short sentence captures a whole ethic of caring for others. In Deuteronomy, the instruction reads, "Teach them diligently to your children, and talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you rise up." Deuteronomy 11:19. This verse shows that the law is meant to be spoken, thought about, and lived at every moment. The story of the giving of the law also includes a moment of fear and awe. The text says, "The people trembled and stood still at the voice of the thunder." Exodus 19:16. The experience was powerful enough to make the whole community pause. That pause is similar to the pause people feel when they hear a thunderstorm and look up at the sky. The pause signals that something important is happening. The law, then, arrives with a sense of urgency and significance that demands attention. The concept of divine law also appears in the writings of later Jewish philosophers. Maimonides wrote, "The commandments are a way for the mind to understand the will of the Creator." He saw the law as a bridge between intellect and faith. This view helps people who love reason see the value of the law. By framing the law as a tool for understanding, it becomes less about blind obedience and more about thoughtful engagement. Rashi, on the other hand, often explained a verse by linking it to a daily activity. When he read the command to keep the Sabbath holy, he said it meant to set aside the day for a special purpose, like a family gathering. By tying the law to a familiar scene, Rashi made the abstract command feel concrete. This method shows how the law can be taught in a way that fits everyday life. The idea that the law is a guide rather than a history book also appears in the way the text is used in prayer. In the Judaism teaches that there is one God who made the world and who cares for every living thing. This belief is called monotheism. It is the core of Jewish thought and practice. The idea of a single, all-powerful creator appears early in the Hebrew Bible. In Genesis, the voice says, "Let there be light," and light appears. The same voice later says, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." This simple statement tells the reader that God is the one who acts and who cares. The early prophets also speak of a God who is both powerful and loving. The prophet Isaiah says, "The Lord is a shelter for the weary, a stronghold in times of trouble." In this image, God is like a safe place for those who need help. The idea that God is both strong and kind is repeated throughout the scriptures. It becomes the foundation for later Jewish philosophers. One of the first thinkers to explain this idea in a systematic way was Saadia Gaon, who lived in the 9th century in Baghdad. Saadia wrote a book called Emmanuel, which means beliefs and opinions. In it he argued that God is one, indivisible, and not like anything in the world. He wrote, "God is not a body, nor does he have parts. He is beyond all human thought." Saadia also said that God's caring nature can be seen in the way he gave the Torah to the people of Israel. The Torah, he explained, is a guide that shows how to live well and stay safe. In this way, God shows love by giving direction. A few centuries later, Moses Maimonides, also known as Rambam, wrote a famous work called The Guide for the Perplexed. Maimonides tried to answer the doubts of educated Jews who were exposed to Greek philosophy. He said that God is absolutely one, without any division, and that God does not change. He wrote, "The one God is the ultimate cause of everything, yet he is not a cause like the things we see." Maimonides also stressed that God's caring nature is shown in the commandments. Each command is a way for people to protect themselves and to grow spiritually. For Maimonides, the laws are a sign of God's concern for human well-being. Both Saadia and Maimonides used everyday language to explain a very big idea. They compared God's role to things people know. One common analogy is that of a parent who sets rules for safety. A parent tells a child not to touch a hot stove. The rule protects the child from harm. In the same way, God gives commandments that protect people from moral danger. The parent's love is shown by the rules that keep the child safe. Likewise, God's love is shown by the laws that keep the community safe. Another analogy is that of a gardener who nurtures plants. A gardener waters, prunes, and protects the plants from pests. The gardener does not force the plants to grow. The gardener provides the right conditions. In the same way, God creates the world, gives it the right conditions, and watches over it. God does not push people to act, but provides the guidance that helps them flourish. The gardener's care is patient and steady, just as God's care is described in the Psalms. The Lord watches over the ways of the righteous. These analogies help a modern listener see how a powerful creator can also be caring. They show that power does not have to be harsh. Power can be used to protect, to guide, and to nurture. This view is woven into many Jewish prayers. In the daily prayer called the Shema, the words say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." The prayer reminds the worshipper that the one God is both the source of all power and the source of all love. The idea of one caring God has been tested by many questions. One major question is called the problem of evil. If God is all-powerful and all-caring, why does suffering exist? The Bible itself records many moments of pain, such as the destruction of the temple, the exile from the land, and personal tragedies. Jewish thinkers have offered several answers. One answer comes from the concept of free will. The story of Abraham's covenant provides a clear illustration. In Genesis, God says to Abraham, "I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you." Abraham is asked to leave his home and travel to an unknown land. Later, God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. Abraham obeys, but at the last moment, an angel stops him. This story shows that God can test a person, but also that God does not force a person to act against their will. The test is a way for Abraham to show trust. The story is used to explain that suffering can be a test that helps a person grow, and that God does not cause suffering without purpose. Another answer is that the world is not perfect because it is a place for learning. Saadia wrote that the world is a school where souls learn to choose good over bad. The presence of evil gives people the chance to make real choices. If there were no danger, there would be no real freedom. This idea links directly to later sections on free will and moral law, where the video will explore how choices shape character. A second major challenge is the claim that God is a human invention. Some critics say that the idea of a single creator was invented to give order to society. In medieval times, Jewish scholars often debated Christian theologians who argued that God was a distant ruler, not a caring parent. One famous debate took place in the city of Toledo in the 12th century. A Jewish scholar named Judah Halevi met with a Christian monk named Peter the Venerable. Peter argued that God was beyond human comprehension and therefore could not be known through the Torah. Judah replied, "The Torah is a lamp that lights the path for the people. It is not a myth, but a guide given by the one who cares for us." This exchange shows how Jewish thinkers defended the idea that God is real, caring, and revealed through Scripture. Another medieval exchange involved Maimonides and a Christian philosopher named Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas claimed that reason alone could prove the existence of a single creator, but that the details of the Torah were not needed. Maimonides responded that reason can point to a creator, but that the Torah gives the specific ways that creator cares for the people. He wrote, "Reason opens the door, but the Torah shows the room." This statement highlights the Jewish view that faith and reason work together. These debates illustrate that the claim of a caring creator has faced serious challenges. Yet Jewish thinkers have answered each challenge with reason and story. The answers often return to the idea that God's caring nature is shown in the covenant, in the commandments, and in the ongoing relationship with the people. The covenant with Abraham is a key historical anecdote that shows how monotheism was linked to a caring relationship. When God promised Abraham a land and a people, the promise was not just a statement of power. It was a promise of protection and provision. The covenant is recorded in Genesis 15, where God says, "Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars." The promise includes a promise of blessing, not just ownership. This story is used throughout Jewish history to remind the people that God's power is paired with care. A second anecdote comes from the story of the Exodus. When the Israelites left Egypt, they faced many dangers in the desert. The Bible tells of a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud by day that guided them. The pillar is a symbol of God's presence and protection. Even when the people complained, God sent rain and manna to sustain them. This event shows a creator who not only makes the world, but also watches over it day by day. These two stories, Abraham's covenant and the Exodus, are often quoted in sermons and lessons. They serve as concrete examples of a God who is both all-powerful and deeply involved in the lives of the people. Modern interpretations of monotheism keep these themes alive. Some contemporary Jewish thinkers speak of God as a source of moral energy. They avoid thinking of God as a distant ruler and instead see God as the force that inspires compassion and justice. Others use the language of process theology, which says that God is always becoming, learning with the world. Even with these new ideas, the core belief stays the same. There is one God who cares. In everyday life, this belief shows up in simple practices. When a person lights a candle on the Sabbath, the act is a reminder that God set the rhythm of the week. When a community gathers for prayer, the shared words express trust in a caring Creator. In both cases, the actions are small, but they echo the larger idea that God is present and caring. The video will later explore how this belief shapes ideas about free will and moral law. The belief that God cares leads to the view that moral law is not just a set of rules, but a path to well-being. The commandments become a way to protect oneself and others, much like a parent's rules protect a child. To sum up, Judaism's view of monotheism presents a creator who is both all-powerful and caring. Saadia Gaon and Maimonides built rational arguments that explain this view. They used analogies of a parent's rules and a gardener's care to make the idea clear. They answered the problem of evil by pointing to free will and the learning purpose of the world. They answered the claim that God is a human invention by showing how scripture and reason together reveal a real, caring God. Historical anecdotes such as Abraham's covenant and the Exodus illustrate the concept in vivid detail. Medieval debates with Christian scholars show how the idea was defended in the public arena. Modern thinkers continue to speak of a caring God in new language, but the core stays the same. The next part of the series will look at how this belief in a caring creator influences the Jewish understanding of free will. It will also examine how moral law is seen as a guide for living well. The story of monotheism and the nature of God sets the stage for those deeper discussions. The story of the covenant begins with a promise that is spoken in a desert, a promise that says a people will be set apart because they keep a special agreement with God. In the book of Exodus, the voice of God says, "You shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Exodus 19:6. That line is often called the covenant of chosenness. It tells the reader that the Jewish people have a unique role, a role that is bound up with law, with ritual, and with a sense of collective identity. The idea of a covenant is not a simple contract like a modern business deal. It is a relationship that includes love, responsibility, and a shared destiny. The early codifiers of Jewish law took this idea very seriously. Rabbi Judah the Prince, the redactor of the Mishnah, wrote in Pirkei Avot, "The world stands on three things: Torah, service, and acts of kindness." Pirkei Avot 1:2. By placing Torah at the top, he links the covenant to the study of sacred text. He also links it to how people act toward each other. In this view, the covenant is not only about a special status. It is also about a set of duties that shape daily life. The covenant becomes a guide for how a community lives together. Modern voices repeat the same pattern. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, a recent chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, said, "The covenant is the promise that the world will be better if we keep the covenant together." He explains that the promise is not a guarantee of safety or wealth. It is a call to work for justice, for peace, for kindness. He writes that the covenant makes a people responsible for the whole of humanity, not just for themselves. This modern reading shows how the ancient idea can still speak to today's world. To see how the covenant works in everyday life, imagine a sports team. A team has a shared goal: to win a game. Each player knows the rules of the sport, practices together, and trusts that the others will do their part. If one player breaks the rule, the whole team suffers. The team's identity is built on the agreement that each member will follow the rules and support the others. In the same way, the covenant asks a people to follow the laws given by God and to look after each other. The goal is not a trophy, but a moral life. Another picture is a neighborhood that looks out for each other. In a close-knit block, residents share tools, watch each other's homes, and help with chores. They have a common understanding that they will protect one another. The bond is not written in a legal document, but it is felt in daily actions. The covenant works similarly. It asks the community to keep the laws and to care for the vulnerable. The sense of belonging comes from the shared promise to act together. The covenant also appears in the story of the Exodus. The people of Israel leave Egypt, cross a desert, and receive the covenant at Mount Sinai. The narrative shows a group that is constantly tested, that doubts, that argues, but that also receives a clear set of instructions. The tablets of stone become a symbol of the agreement. The story is repeated in the liturgy, in the weekly reading, and in the memory of the people. It reminds each generation that the covenant is a living thing, not a relic. A second historical anecdote comes after the horrors of World War. In 1948, the State of Israel is declared. Survivors of the Holocaust, refugees, and Jews from many lands come together to build a new home. The founders speak of a return to the covenant, of a place where the ancient promise can be lived out. They see the new nation as a chance to fulfill the covenant in a modern setting. The re-establishment of Israel shows how the idea can inspire political action, social organization, and a sense of purpose. The covenant has been linked to Jewish law, or halakha, in many teachings. Law is the practical side of the covenant. It tells how to keep the promise in daily life. The earlier discussion on law and community explains that the rules are not just rules. They are ways to shape a moral society. The covenant gives those laws a deeper meaning. It says that the laws are part of a larger promise to the world. However, the notion of chosenness also faces criticism. One common counterargument is that the claim of exclusivity can be read as a statement that one people are better than others. Critics say that this can lead to a sense of superiority, that it can justify discrimination. They point to passages that speak of a chosen people and ask whether that language can be used to exclude others. The argument asks whether a covenant that names a single group can be fair in a world of many peoples. A second counterargument warns of tribalism. The fear is that a strong sense of collective identity can become a barrier to integration. When a community focuses on its own covenant, it may become closed to outsiders, or it may resist change. Critics say that this can lead to conflict, that it can fuel nationalism that harms peace. They ask whether the covenant can be kept without turning into an exclusive club. Supporters of the covenant respond to these concerns. They say that the covenant includes a duty to the stranger. The Torah commands, "Love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Leviticus 19:34. This verse shows that the promise also carries an ethic of hospitality. Rabbi Judah, the prince, taught that the covenant is a call to protect the vulnerable, not to dominate them. Rabbi Sacks added that the covenant is a promise to the whole world, that the Jewish people are a light for all nations. The idea is that chosenness does not mean superiority, but responsibility. The responsibility part can be illustrated in the sports team picture. A star player could ignore the team's strategy and still score. But if that player does not pass the ball, the team loses. The covenant asks each member to think beyond personal gain. It asks the community to see how each action affects the whole. In the neighborhood picture, a resident who never helps neighbors may enjoy personal peace, but the whole block suffers when danger appears. The covenant encourages a balance between individual desire and collective well-being. In modern Israel, the covenant is often discussed in political debates. Some leaders argue that the state must keep the covenant by protecting Jewish life, while others stress that the covenant also requires justice for non-Jewish citizens. The tension shows how the ancient promise can be applied in a pluralistic society. It also shows how the covenant can be a source of moral reflection, not just a political slogan. The idea of a covenant also appears in other religious traditions. In Christianity, the term New Covenant is used to describe a different relationship with God. In Islam, the concept of a covenant between God and humanity is also present. The Jewish version is distinct because it ties the covenant to a specific people and a set of laws. This distinctiveness is part of what makes the discussion of chosenness both powerful and controversial. The covenant is also linked to the concept of collective memory. The Exodus story is retold each year at Passover. The ritual of eating bitter herbs, of drinking 4 cups of wine, of reading the Haggadah, all serve to remind the people of the promise. The memory is not just about past events, it is a way to keep the covenant alive. The modern celebration of Israel's Independence Day does a similar job. It recalls the re-establishment of a homeland and the hope that the ancient promise can be fulfilled again. The covenant also informs Jewish education. Schools teach the story of the covenant, the laws that flow from it, and the moral duties that accompany it. Children learn that being part of a community means more than sharing a language or a culture. It means sharing a promise to act with justice. The educational system thus becomes a place where the covenant is passed down, not just as a historical fact, but as a lived ethic. In the realm of ethics, the covenant is often used to argue for social justice. The command to care for the poor, to give charity, to treat workers fairly, all come from the covenantal framework, Rabbi Sachs wrote. The covenant is a moral contract that obliges us to look after the weakest among us. This view ties the ancient promise to modern concerns like poverty, inequality, and environmental stewardship. By seeing these issues through the lens of the covenant, the community can find a common language for action. The covenant also shapes personal identity. A person who identifies as Jewish may feel a sense of belonging that is both cultural and spiritual. The feeling that one belongs to a people with a shared promise can give purpose. At the same time, the individual must wrestle with the expectations that come with that belonging. The balance between personal freedom and communal duty is a recurring theme in Jewish thought. The idea of a covenant can be compared to a contract in a business partnership. In a partnership, each partner brings resources and agrees to share profits and losses. The partnership works only if each partner keeps their promises. If one partner cheats, the whole venture suffers. The covenant works similarly, but it is not about money. It is about moral goods. The partners are the members of the community, and the profit is a world that reflects justice and peace. A second analogy is that of a garden. A gardener plants seeds, waters them, removes weeds, and protects the plants from pests. The garden thrives only when each step is taken. The covenant asks the community to tend to the moral garden of the world. If the community neglects the garden, weeds of hatred and injustice grow. The covenant is a reminder to keep the garden cared for, season after season. The covenant also appears in the daily prayers. The Shema, a central prayer, says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." Deuteronomy 6:4. The prayer continues, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might." This is a call to love God, but it also implies love for the community that shares that love. The prayer links the individual's devotion to the collective promise. In the Mishnah, Rabbi Judah the Prince records a teaching. Who is wise? He who learns from every person. This statement shows that the covenant includes a humility that allows learning from others, even from those outside the community. The covenant, then, is not a wall that shuts out the world. It is a door that invites dialogue while still keeping the core promise. The modern scholar, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, often spoke about covenant thinking. He said that this way of thinking helps societies balance individual rights with communal responsibilities. He gave the example of a public park. If each person only thought about personal use, the park would become littered and unsafe. If each person thought about the common good, the park would stay clean and welcoming. The covenant provides a framework for that balance. The risk of exclusivity, however, remains a real concern. Some argue that the language of chosenness can be misused to claim that other groups have no moral standing. Historical episodes. The idea of tzedek, the Hebrew word for justice, first appears in the earliest books of the Bible. In the opening of the Torah, the command to act justly is placed next to the command to love one's neighbor. Deuteronomy 16:20 says, "Justice, justice you shall pursue." The repetition shows how central the concept is. The prophets repeat the call. Isaiah 1:17 urges, "Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression." The voice of the prophet is calm but firm. It tells a people that their worship is empty if they do not treat each other with fairness. The ancient texts tie justice to kindness. The Hebrew phrase tzedek umishpat means justice and righteousness together. In the Jewish mind, the two are inseparable. The early sages built on this foundation. Maimonides, the medieval philosopher, wrote that the purpose of the law is to teach people to act with compassion. He said that the law is a guide that shapes the heart. In the 20th century, Abraham Joshua Heschel added a fresh voice. Heschel said, "The opposite of love is not hate, but indifference." He meant that ignoring the suffering of another is the real moral failure. Heschel's words echo the ancient call to seek justice. He also wrote, "Our goal is to be more fully human," pointing to the idea that justice is part of what makes a person truly human. These thinkers form a line that stretches from the prophets to modern ethicists. Their arguments share a common thread. First, justice is not a private matter. It is a public duty. Second, kindness is the practical side of that duty. The prophets warned that a society that neglects the poor will be judged harshly. The sages taught that the law must be lived out in daily actions. The modern ethicist showed that the same ideas can guide people in a modern city. The core claim is simple. A just world needs both fair rules and caring hearts. One way to see this in daily life is at a market. Imagine a seller setting a price for grain. The seller knows the market rate. He could raise the price because many need grain that day. A person who follows the Jewish ethic of tzedek would ask for a fair price. He would remember the command to not oppress the stranger. He would ask for a price that reflects the true value, not the moment's demand. The transaction becomes an act of justice. The seller is reminded that profit is not the only goal. The buyer is reminded that honesty builds trust. Another everyday scene shows the same idea. A neighbor struggles to bring groceries home after a long day. A person who lives by the ethic of tzedek will offer help. He may carry a bag or share a portion of his own food. The act is small, but it reflects the command to love your neighbor as yourself. The kindness is not a grand gesture. It is a simple, caring response. The neighbor feels seen and valued. The helper feels a sense of purpose. In this way, the ancient call to justice lives in modern streets. These examples act like a scale. On one side sits the law, written on parchment. On the other side sits the heart, feeling the needs of others. The scale balances when both sides are present. If the law is too strict, the heart may become cold. If the heart acts without any rule, the result can be chaotic. Jewish thought teaches that the two must work together. The law gives direction. The heart gives compassion. Some people argue that religious ethics are outdated. They say that old texts speak to a world that no longer exists. They claim that the modern world needs science, not ancient commandments. This view sees the biblical call to justice as a relic. It suggests that people can be moral without any reference to God. The argument is that humanity has learned enough to create its own moral code. A second common claim is that secular law is enough. In many countries, there are statutes that punish theft, protect the poor, and ensure fair trade. The argument says that if the law protects rights, there is no need for religious ideas. It holds that a just society can be built on contracts and courts alone. The claim is that moral guidance from religion is unnecessary when the state already enforces fairness. The Jewish response to these challenges rests on both history and lived practice. First, the claim that religious ethics are old does not consider the way the tradition has been reinterpreted over time. The prophets spoke in the language of their day, but the core idea, care for the vulnerable, remains relevant. The modern ethicist shows how the same principle can be applied to civil rights, environmental care, and technology. The idea adapts, not disappears. Second, the claim that secular law is enough overlooks the gap between law and love. Laws can punish wrongdoing, but they do not always inspire the inner desire to do good. The Talmud tells a story that fills this gap. A man was traveling on a dusty road when he saw a stranger collapse from thirst. The traveler had a small jar of water. He could have kept it for himself, but he poured it over the stranger's head, letting the water soak into the sand. The stranger rose, grateful, and the traveler felt a warmth in his heart. The story is recorded not to teach a legal rule, but to show that true justice includes personal sacrifice. The act went beyond any legal requirement. Another Talmudic anecdote illustrates the same point. A wealthy merchant saw a poor man trying to carry a heavy bundle of wood. The merchant offered to carry it for him. The poor man refused, fearing shame. The merchant insisted, saying, "If I do not help, the world will think I am cruel." The merchant's action was praised not because the law demanded it, but because it reflected a heart that seeks justice. The story shows that the desire to help can be stronger than any external rule. These stories have a modern echo in the life of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. In the early 1960s, Heschel walked side by side with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. during the civil rights marches in Selma. He said later, "I was a stranger in a strange land, but I felt at home when I stood with the marchers." Heschel's presence was not required by any law. He chose to act because the call for justice resonated in his heart. His participation showed that the ancient command to care for the oppressed can move across continents and centuries. The marchers welcomed him, and his voice added a spiritual depth to the protest. The event became a living example of how Jewish ethics can meet modern struggles. The impact of Heschel's activism is still felt. In many Jewish communities today, volunteers organize food banks, help refugees, and fight for environmental justice. They cite the same prophetic call to seek justice. The modern movement calls itself Tikkun Olam, meaning repairing the world. The phrase captures the idea that each person can take part in fixing the broken parts of society. The ethic of Tzedek is the engine that drives this work. It tells people that justice is not a distant ideal, but a daily task. When the video moves to the next part about law and prayer, the link becomes clear. The law, or halakha, gives the structure. It tells when to give charity, when to keep a fair weight, and when to speak truth. Prayer, on the other hand, shapes the inner world. The daily prayer, Avinu Malkeinu, asks for mercy and for the ability to do good. The two together form a rhythm. The law says what to do. The prayer asks for the strength to do it. The concept of tzedek lives at the intersection of these two practices. It is a reminder that justice is both an external action and an inner intention. To bring the idea home, another simple analogy can be used. Think of a garden. The law is the fence that keeps out the weeds. The heart is the water that helps the plants grow. If the fence is strong, but there is no water, the garden stays empty. If there is water, but no fence, the weeds take over. Only when both are present does the garden flourish. In the same way, justice needs both the rule and the caring heart. A final example shows how the ethic works in a modern market. A small shop in a city decides to label every product with its source. The owner explains that this helps customers know if the goods were made fairly. Some customers think it is unnecessary. The owner replies that the practice follows the ancient call to not oppress the stranger. By sharing the truth, the shop practices tzedek. The shop's reputation grows, and other stores begin to copy the idea. The small act spreads, showing how a simple ethical choice can ripple outward. Another story comes from a neighborhood in a large town. A group of families organized a weekly ride to bring groceries to an elderly couple who could no longer leave their home. The idea started when a child asked why the couple was not getting food. The families remembered the teaching that the righteous are like a lamp in the night. They decided to act. The weekly rides became a community tradition. The act of helping the neighbor turned into a lesson for the children about the value of kindness. The story shows that the ancient ethic can shape new habits. The discussion of counter-arguments also benefits from looking at history. In the 19th century, some Jewish thinkers argued that the old laws were too strict for modern life. They suggested that the spirit of the law, its ethical heart, should be kept, while the details could be changed. This debate mirrors today's claim that religious ethics are outdated. The answer that emerged was not to discard the old, but to reinterpret it. The same pattern can be seen in how modern Jewish groups respond to the claim that secular law is enough. They point out that law can punish, but it cannot always inspire the inner desire to act kindly. The stories of the Talmud and of Heschel illustrate that point. In the end, the pursuit of tzedek is a lifelong path. It starts with small choices, like paying a fair price or sharing a bag of groceries. It grows into larger actions, like marching for civil rights or creating a fair trade program. The prophets, the sages, and modern thinkers all speak with one voice. Justice and kindness belong together. The ancient texts give the language. The modern world gives the stage. The heart gives the drive. When all three work together, the world becomes a place where each person can feel seen and respected. The next segment on law will explore how the written rules shape daily life. The following part on prayer will show how the inner voice keeps the heart aligned with those rules. Together, they form the full picture of Jewish ethics. The story of tzedek is not a distant. The story of free will in Judaism begins in the earliest verses of the Bible. In the Garden of Eden, the first humans are told to choose between the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. The text says, "You may eat of every tree of the garden, but not of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." Genesis 2:16. That single command creates a space for human choice. The story shows that God gave a command that could be obeyed or ignored. The outcome of that choice would affect all of humanity. From this moment, Jewish thought has tried to balance the idea that God knows everything with the belief that people can act on their own. Later prophets repeat the theme of choice. The prophet Isaiah declares, "Choose this day whom you will serve," Isaiah 24:16. The phrase, "choose," appears again in the book of Deuteronomy, where the law tells the Israelites to choose life. Deuteronomy 30:19. These verses suggest that the Torah expects people to make real decisions. At the same time, the same books often say that God watches every step. The psalmist writes, "The Lord looks down from heaven. He sees all the children of men." Psalm 33:13. The tension between seeing all and letting people choose becomes the heart of the philosophical discussion. The first major Jewish thinker to write a systematic view of this tension was Rabbi Levi ben Gershon, known as Gersonides. He lived in the 13th century in Spain and wrote a work called The Wars of the Lord. In that work he argued that God knows all possible outcomes, but does not force any single outcome on a person. He used the word providence to describe how God arranges the world. But he said that providence works through the choices people make. Gersonides wrote, "God knows the future, but he does not compel the will of man." The Wars of the Lord, Part I. He tried to keep God's knowledge and human freedom from stepping on each other. Centuries later, Rabbi Yitzhak Hutner offered a modern take on the same problem. Hutner taught in the mid-20th century in America and Israel. He emphasized that God's plan is like a river that flows through the landscape of human deeds. The river can bend around rocks, but it never stops moving. Hutner said, "The divine plan is a framework, and within that framework each soul builds its own house." Letters on the weekly Torah portion. He kept the idea that God's overall direction is fixed, while the details are left to each person. These two thinkers illustrate two ways to see the balance. Gersonides focuses on the idea that God's knowledge is like a map that shows all routes, but the driver still picks the road. Hutner focuses on the idea that God's plan is a garden path that can be walked in many steps, and each step is chosen by the walker. Both try to keep God all-seeing and people responsible for their actions. To help a listener picture this balance, imagine a driver on a long road trip. The driver decides which highway to take, which exit to use, and when to stop for coffee. At the same time, the weather can change without warning. A storm may force the driver to slow down or take a detour. The driver still chose the route, but the weather, which is beyond the driver's control, shapes the final journey. In the same way, Judaism says that a person chooses actions, but divine providence can change the conditions that affect the result. A second everyday picture uses a student preparing for a big exam. The student reads the textbook, solves practice problems, and reviews notes. All of those actions are under the student's control. Yet the student also hopes for good luck, perhaps a quiet room, a clear mind, or a kind grader. The student's effort is the main factor, but the extra help from luck is like a hidden hand that can make a difference. The Jewish view holds that the student must study, but also trusts that God may bless the effort with a favorable outcome. These analogies show how choice and providence can work side by side. They also set the stage for two strong objections that have been raised throughout Jewish history. The first objection is strict determinism. Determinism says that everything that happens is fixed in advance, and that no human action can change the outcome. In a deterministic view, the driver's decision is an illusion because the weather, the traffic, and the road conditions already decide where the car will end. The second objection is extreme libertarian free will. That view says that human beings are completely free, like a blank canvas. In that picture, God's plan is only a background story, and nothing in the world can limit a person's choice. The strict determinist argument appears in some medieval Jewish texts. The debate over predestination in the 13th century, especially among the scholars of the Maimonidean school, raised the question of whether God already wrote every soul's fate. One famous story tells of a scholar named Rabbi Moses of Kusi, who argued that if God knows the future, then God must have already decided each person's actions. He asked, if the future is known, how can a person be praised for a good deed that was already written? Critics of this view replied that God's knowledge does not equal God's will to force a deed. They said that knowing an outcome is like seeing a finished painting. The painter does not have to move the brush again. The libertarian free will objection shows up in the writings of some Kabbalists. They claim that the soul is a spark of the divine light that can rise or fall as it wishes. In that picture, God's plan is only a suggestion, and each soul can step outside the plan at any time. The Kabbalist Rabbi Isaac Luria, for example, wrote about tikkun, the repair of the world, as something that each person must do on their own, without any divine schedule. Critics of extreme liberty point out that if anyone could act outside God's will, then moral standards would collapse. They ask, if a person can break the divine order at will, what does it mean to be good? Both objections force Jewish philosophers to clarify their positions. Gersonides answered the deterministic claim by separating God's knowledge from causation. He said that God sees all possible worlds, like a chess player who can see every move ahead. But the player does not move the pieces for the opponent. The opponent still decides which piece to move. In that sense, God's foreknowledge does not make a person's act necessary. He wrote, the knowledge of the future is not a chain that binds the will, the wars of the Lord, part 2. This answer keeps moral responsibility alive. Huttner answered the libertarian claim by reminding people that the world is not a sandbox where anything can happen. He used the image of a garden. A gardener can plant many kinds of seeds, but the soil, the rain, and the seasons still shape what grows. A seed cannot become a tree that defies the laws of nature. In the same way, a soul cannot act in a way that completely ignores the divine order. He wrote, "The freedom of the soul works within the limits set by the Creator." Letters on the Weekly Torah Portion. This view says that freedom is real, but it is not absolute. Real-world applications of this balance appear in daily Jewish life. When a person decides whether to tell the truth in a difficult situation, the choice is theirs. Yet the community's response, the consequences that follow, and the way God may bless or correct the person are part of providence. The law of Edin Rodef, which permits stopping a pursuer, rests on the idea that a person can act to protect others, while trusting that God will judge the outcome. In business, a merchant who chooses honest trade hopes that God will bring success, but also knows that dishonest actions bring punishment. The balance of choice and divine plan gives a framework for ethical decisions. The concept also influences how prayer is understood. In later sections of the video, the discussion will turn to how prayer works when both free will and providence are present. The idea is that prayer is a way to ask for help within the space that God has already prepared. A person can pray for a better outcome, but the prayer does not override the choice the person must still make. This view matches the driver analogy. The driver can pray for clear skies, but still must steer the car. The afterlife discussion later will also rely on this balance. Jewish thought says that the soul's final state depends on the choices made in life. Yet God's mercy can lift a soul beyond what the deeds alone would deserve. The balance shows that both effort and divine compassion matter. This ties back to the student analogy. The student studies hard, but a kind teacher may also give extra help. In the afterlife, the soul's work is weighed, and divine grace can tip the scale. Two concrete examples help to see this balance in action. The first example is a parent deciding whether to enroll a child in a religious school. The parent weighs the benefits of learning Hebrew, the cost of tuition, and the child's personal interests. The parent makes a choice, but the outcome also depends on the child's response, the quality of teachers, and perhaps unexpected events like a sudden illness. The parent trusts that God will guide the child's growth, while also taking responsibility for the decision. The second example is a community leader organizing a charity drive. The leader chooses the method, the timing, and the people to involve. The success of the drive will also depend on weather, the generosity of donors, and the political climate. The leader can pray for a good outcome, but the real work lies in the choices made. This story shows how Jewish thought sees human effort as a partner with divine help. Historical anecdotes illustrate how the balance has been debated over centuries. The story of Jonah offers a vivid picture. Jonah is told by God to go to Nineveh and warn the people there. He tries to run away, boarding a ship to Tarshish. A great storm threatens the ship, and the sailors throw Jonah overboard to calm the sea. Jonah is swallowed by a great fish, spends 3 days inside, and finally obeys God's command. The narrative shows both divine providence, the storm that forces Jonah back, and Jonah's own choice to flee and later to obey. The text says, "And the Lord prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah." Jonah 1:17. The story teaches that God can intervene, but the person still must decide how to act. A second anecdote comes from the medieval debate over predestination that took place in the courts of the Kingdom of Aragon. Scholars gathered to discuss whether the Torah teaches that God has already written the fate of every soul. Rabbi Isaac Alfasi argued that the Torah says, "The Lord has set a day for everything," Ecclesiasticus 1:1, meaning that God's plan is fixed. Rabbi Maimonides countered that the verse speaks about the ultimate end, not about each small choice. The debate ended without a final. Prayer and quiet thought have a long place in Jewish life. From the earliest verses of the Torah to modern classrooms, the act of speaking to God and listening inside the heart is seen as a way to shape the mind and the soul. The story begins in the desert, when the people of Israel first heard the voice of God. The command to pray was given alongside the laws of food, dress, and justice. The idea was that prayer would keep the people close to the divine, even when the walls of the temple fell. In later generations, thinkers added new layers to this idea. They asked how prayer could become a tool for inner growth, not just a ritual. One of the most important voices on this topic was Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad Hasidism. He wrote a work called The Tanya, in which he explained that prayer is more than asking for help. He said that prayer is a way to bring the heart into alignment with God's will. He wrote, "The purpose of prayer is to bring the heart close to the divine, to make the soul feel the presence of the Almighty." In simple terms, he taught that when a person prays, the mind and heart become a single channel that can receive divine light. This view turned prayer into a practice of inner focus, similar to what modern mindfulness teachers call present moment awareness. Modern teachers of mindfulness have taken some of these ideas and placed them in a secular setting. John Kabat-Zinn, a well-known teacher of mindfulness, often speaks about paying attention to breath and body. He does not refer to God, but the technique is similar to the quiet contemplation that Rabbi Shneur Zalman described. Some modern Jewish teachers, such as Rabbi Sharon Brous, blend the two. They invite people to sit in silence, notice their thoughts, and then speak a short prayer that thanks the world. In this way, the old practice of prayer meets the new practice of meditation. To see how this works in everyday life, imagine a person who wakes up each morning and makes a cup of coffee. While the coffee brews, the person pauses, takes a deep breath, and says a short prayer. The prayer may be as simple as, "May this day be filled with kindness." The act of pausing, breathing, and speaking a prayer sets a tone for the day. It is a small ritual that moves the mind from sleep to intention. The coffee itself becomes a cue for reflection. The person feels a calm focus that carries into work, study, or family life. At night, the same person may sit at a desk and write a list of things they are grateful for. This habit is a form of quiet reflection that mirrors the Hasidic practice of Hitbodedut, a private, unscripted conversation with God. In Hitbodedut, a person goes to a quiet place, often a forest or a small room, and speaks to God in their own language, sharing hopes, fears, and thanks. The bedtime gratitude list works the same way. By writing down the good moments, the mind learns to notice blessings. The act of writing also slows the brain, helping the person settle into sleep. These two examples show how prayer and meditation can be woven into daily routines. They also show how the inner life can influence outer actions. When a person starts the day with a prayer for kindness, they are more likely to act kindly toward others. When they end the day by noting gratitude, they are more likely to feel content and less prone to anger. The inner work of prayer and quiet thought therefore supports the ethical teachings of Judaism, which call for justice, compassion, and honesty. The link between inner life and divine law is clear. A heart that feels the presence of God will be more careful to follow the commandments. The origins of prayer in Jewish thought are rooted in the Psalms of King David. The story goes that David, while fleeing from his enemies, would sit on a hill, look at the sky, and sing verses that praised God. One psalm says, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer." David's songs were not only cries for help, they were ways to shape his own heart. By putting his fears into words, he turned anxiety into trust. This story is often told to show how prayer can change a person's inner state. It also shows that prayer is not just a request. It is a way to reframe one's view of the world. Another historical anecdote comes from the Hasidic masters of the 18th century. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, a student of the Chabad line, would go into the forest alone for hours. He would speak to God in his own words, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. This practice is called hitbodedut, which means seclusion or solitude. The purpose was to clear the mind of daily clutter and to speak honestly. Rabbi Nachman taught that anyone can do this, even without a formal study hall. He said, "Speak to the Almighty as you would speak to a close friend." The image of a lone figure in a quiet forest helps a modern viewer picture the power of quiet reflection. These anecdotes illustrate two different styles of prayer. David's psalms are poetic and communal. They can be sung by a choir or recited in a synagogue. Hitbodedut is private and spontaneous. It is a conversation that happens in a personal space. Both share a common goal: to bring the heart into alignment with the divine. They also show how prayer can be adapted to different settings, whether in a crowd or in solitude. The arguments for prayer and meditation in Jewish thought are many. One argument is that prayer creates a direct link between the human soul and the divine source. When a person prays, they open a channel that can receive guidance. This guidance can appear as an inner sense of right and wrong, which then informs ethical choices. Another argument is that quiet reflection helps a person become aware of their own habits. By noticing thoughts, a person can see where anger or greed arise. This awareness allows the person to change behavior, fulfilling the command to love one's neighbor. Critics raise two main objections. The first claim is that prayer is superstition. Some say that speaking to an unseen being cannot affect the world, and that prayer is simply wishful thinking. In response, Jewish thinkers point to the measurable effects of prayer on the heart. Rabbi Shneur Zalman argued that prayer changes the inner landscape, not the external circumstances alone. When a person feels calm after prayer, they are more likely to act wisely. Modern psychology supports this view. Studies show that regular reflective practice reduces stress and improves decision-making. Thus, prayer can be seen as a tool for mental health, which in turn shapes actions. The second objection is that meditation is a secular practice only, and that it belongs to yoga studios, not to the synagogue. Some argue that bringing meditation into Jewish prayer dilutes the tradition. The counterpoint is that meditation has deep roots in Jewish mysticism. The Kabbalists used techniques of focused breathing and visualization to ascend spiritually. The practice of hitbodedut is a clear example of meditation within a Jewish framework. Modern teachers who blend mindfulness with prayer do not erase the past. They revive a hidden part of the tradition. By using secular language, they make the practice accessible, but the underlying purpose remains the same: to open the heart to the divine. Real-world applications of these ideas can be seen in schools, workplaces, and community centers. In a Jewish day school, a teacher may start each class with a brief pause and a short prayer for learning. The pause helps students settle, and the prayer frames the lesson as a shared purpose. In a corporate setting, a Jewish professional might take a few minutes before a meeting to close his eyes, breathe, and whisper a prayer for wisdom. This brief ritual can calm nerves and bring clarity. In a community center, a group may gather for a meditation session that ends with a collective prayer of thanks. Each setting shows how prayer and quiet thought can be woven into daily life, supporting ethical behavior and personal growth. Modern interpretations also bring new language to old ideas. Some scholars speak of spiritual resilience, meaning the ability to bounce back after hardship. They link this resilience to the habit of daily prayer. Others use the term mindful devotion, describing a state where a person is fully present while reciting a blessing. This language helps younger people see the relevance of ancient practice. It also shows that the inner life is not separate from the outer world. It is the engine that drives moral action. Analogies can help clarify the process. Think of the mind as a garden. Prayer is like watering the soil, while meditation is like pulling weeds. When the garden receives water and is kept free of weeds, the plants grow strong. In the same way, prayer nourishes the heart, and quiet reflection removes harmful thoughts. Another analogy compares prayer to a compass. When a traveler is lost, the compass points north. Prayer points the soul toward the divine north, giving direction for ethical choices. These simple images make the concepts easy to grasp. The connection to ethics and divine law is reinforced by the idea that inner work shapes outer deeds. Jewish law, called halakha, includes rules about how to treat others, how to keep promises, and how to act justly. But the law also speaks about intention, called kavanah. Kavanah means focusing one's heart on the purpose of the command. Prayer and meditation are ways to build kavanah. When a person prays before eating, they remember that the food is a gift. When they meditate on gratitude, they recall that many people lack basic needs. This inner awareness fuels the desire to follow the law with compassion. Quotes from primary sources illustrate these points. The Psalms repeatedly say, "Listen, O Lord, to my prayer. Hear my cry for help." This shows that prayer is a plea for divine attention. In the Talmud, a sage states, "One who prays with sincerity brings the world closer to the divine." In the Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman writes, "Prayer is the soul's ascent, a ladder that lifts the heart toward the throne of God." These words, spoken centuries apart, all stress the power of prayer to change the inner self. The practice of Hitbodedut also offers a concrete method. A person can set aside 20 minutes each evening, sit in a quiet room, and speak aloud to God. They may begin with a line from a psalm, then add their own thoughts. They can ask for help, thank for blessings, or simply share the day's events. The key is honesty. The practice does not require fancy language. It only requires a willing heart. Over time, the habit builds a sense of closeness to the divine, which then influences how the person treats others. The modern mindfulness movement often uses breath counting as a simple tool. One can inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and pause for 4. This pattern is called box breathing. When combined with a short prayer, such as, "May my breath bring peace," the exercise becomes both meditation and prayer. The breath anchors the mind, while the prayer gives it direction. This blend shows how ancient practice can meet modern technique. In the morning coffee ritual, the aroma of the brew can act as a cue for prayer. The person may lift the cup, look at the steam, and say, "Blessed are you who creates the morning light." This brief moment connects the story of what comes after death has been told in many ways in the Jewish tradition. It begins in the ancient texts, moves through the voices of the sages, and reaches the thoughts of modern scholars. It is a story that ties together ideas about the soul, about divine justice, and about how a person should live today. In the earliest verses of the Hebrew Bible, the picture of the afterlife is faint. The books of Genesis and Exodus speak of the grave as a place of silence, a shadow where the breath of life stops. Yet even there a hint appears. In the story of Abraham, God promises that Abraham's descendants will become a great nation, a promise that stretches beyond the moment of his death. This promise plants a seed, a small idea that the life of a person may have a reach that goes past the body. The first clear image of a life after death shows up in the prophetic books. The prophet Ezekiel, in a vision of a valley of dry bones, sees the bones come together, flesh grow on them, and breath return to them. The text reads, "And behold, there was a sound, and the bones came together, bone upon bone. Then I saw a breath enter them, and they lived, and stood up as a great army." Ezekiel 37:4-7. This picture of dead bones being revived is a vivid early image of resurrection. It suggests that God can bring life back to what was thought to be dead forever. From this seed of resurrection, the rabbis of the Second Temple period began to talk more openly about what happens after death. Rabbi Akiva, a great teacher of the first century, taught that the world to come, the Olam Haba, is a real place where the soul enjoys the reward of a life lived well. He is recorded as saying, "All is foreseen, but free will is given." This short saying shows a balance. God knows everything, yet each person can choose, and that choice matters for the soul's future. Rabbi Akiva's view ties the idea of moral choice to a future reward, giving the afterlife a purpose in everyday life. Later, the Mishnah and the Talmud collect many sayings that flesh out the picture. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin 10:1 states that the righteous of all generations have a share in the world to come. The Talmud adds detail, describing a garden where the soul rests, a place of peace and light. It also mentions the concept of Techiat Hametim, the resurrection of the dead, which will happen in the Messianic age. The idea is that the body, once broken, will be restored, much like a seed that grows into a tree after being buried in the earth. The seed analogy is useful. A seed lies hidden in the soil, appearing dead. Yet within it holds the pattern of a tall tree. When the right water and sunlight arrive, the seed sprouts, pushes through the earth, and becomes a living tree. In the same way, the Jewish view holds that the soul, though hidden after the body dies, contains the pattern of future life. The resurrection is the moment when the hidden pattern becomes visible again, when the soul and body reunite. A second everyday analogy helps to picture the world to come. Imagine a storybook that ends with the last page turned. The story is over, but the lesson stays in the mind of the reader. The book does not keep a living character inside it, yet the ideas live on. In Jewish thought, the actions of a person are like the story. The physical life ends, but the moral lessons, the impact on others, and the soul's relationship with God continue to teach and inspire. The medieval period brought new discussions. In the 13th century, a great debate erupted among the scholars of Spain and France. Known as the Maimonidean controversy, it centered on the writings of Maimonides, the great philosopher-physician. Maimonides argued that the world to come is a purely spiritual existence, not a physical place. He wrote, "The souls of the righteous will enjoy the radiance of the divine presence, and this is the reward of the world to come." Some of his contemporaries, however, felt that this view downplayed the idea of bodily resurrection. They feared that if the afterlife were only a mental state, the promise of a physical resurrection would be lost. The controversy showed that even within Judaism, the balance between a physical resurrection and a spiritual reward was a lively topic. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, a modern voice, brings the discussion into the present day. He often said that belief in an afterlife is not a way to escape this world, but a way to give meaning to it. He wrote, "The promise of a world beyond gives weight to the deeds we do now." For Rabbi Sacks, the idea of Olam Haba is a moral compass. It reminds people that actions have lasting impact, even if the physical body is gone. He also linked the afterlife to the concept of divine providence, the belief that God watches over the world and guides events. If a person trusts that God cares about the soul after death, that trust can shape how one treats others today. The ethical link is clear. If a soul will be judged, then kindness, honesty, and justice become more than social rules. They become steps toward a future reward. The Talmudic story of the poor man who gave his last coin to a stranger is often told to illustrate this. The man's act is recorded as earning a place in the world to come. The story shows how belief in afterlife can motivate generosity. Real-world applications of these ideas appear in many places. In Israel, the tradition of Yizkor, a memorial prayer said on certain holidays, reflects the belief that the living can help the souls of the dead. Families light candles, say prayers, and donate to charity in the name of their departed relatives. The act is seen as a way to lift the souls toward the world to come. In the diaspora, many Jews observe the custom of leaving a small portion of food on the plate for a deceased loved one, believing that the soul still enjoys the taste of the meal. These practices show how ancient ideas shape daily habits. Modern scholarship also offers fresh angles. Some contemporary Jewish thinkers view the afterlife metaphorically. They see resurrection as a symbol of the renewal of the Jewish people, of the revival of Hebrew language, or of the ongoing impact of a person's teachings. Others, especially within the movement of Jewish renewal, speak of spiritual resurrection that happens when a community embraces the values of compassion and justice, breathing new life into a tradition that might otherwise feel old. Even as these ideas flourish, there are strong counterarguments. One comes from materialist philosophy, which holds that the brain is the seat of all thought and feeling, and that when the brain stops, consciousness ends. From this view, there is no room for a soul, no resurrection, no world to come. The materialist argues that all evidence points to death being final, and that any claim of an afterlife is a wishful story. A second counter-argument focuses on the danger of distraction. Some critics claim that thinking about an afterlife can pull attention away from the duties that must be done now. They say that if a person spends too much time hoping for a future reward, they may neglect the needs of the present, such as feeding the hungry or caring for the sick. This view warns that the promise of Olam Haba could become an excuse for inaction, a way to postpone responsibility. Jewish tradition does not ignore these challenges. The rabbis often warned that belief must be balanced with action. The Talmud says, Who says, "I will do good tomorrow," is not a true believer. The lesson is that hope for the future must be paired with effort today. The story of the prophet Ezekiel's dry bones also teaches a lesson about effort. The bones did not rise by themselves. The breath of God entered them, but the bones had to be placed together first. The vision suggests that both divine help and human preparation are needed. The discussion of resurrection also appears in the prayer service. In the daily Amidah, there is a blessing that says, "May the dead be resurrected, and may the righteous inherit the world to come." This line is spoken 3 times a day, reminding the community that the hope of resurrection is part of daily life, not a distant theory. The concept of Olam Haba also appears in the teachings about divine providence. If God watches over each soul after death, then the world is seen as a place where every action matters. The idea that God is present in the smallest moments, guiding each life, gives a sense that the afterlife is not a separate realm, but an extension of the same caring presence. In literature, the theme shows up often. In the medieval work, Sefer Haggadah, stories of righteous souls ascending to a heavenly realm are collected. In modern novels by authors like Chaim Potok, characters wrestle with the meaning of death and the hope of a future reunion with loved ones. These narratives keep the ancient ideas alive in new forms. The practical side of belief can be seen in the way Jewish law treats the dead. The respect given to a body, the quick burial, the washing and dressing in simple linen, all reflect a view that the body is a vessel that will one day be restored. The care shown to the dead is a sign of hope that the person will rise again. The idea of resurrection also ties into the concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world. If the world will be renewed in a messianic age, then each person's work to fix injustice, to protect the environment, and to build community is part of that larger restoration. The work done now is seen as a preparation for the ultimate renewal that includes both body and soul. Rabbi Akiva, teaching that all is foreseen, but free will is given, offers a way to reconcile the two counterarguments. It says that even if the future is known to God, each person still chooses how to act. The choice matters for the soul's destiny. And that choice must be made now, not postponed. The teaching invites people to act ethically today while holding hope for a future reward. The modern scholar Rabbi Jonathan Sacks expands this balance. He writes that the promise of the world to come is not a ticket to ignore present suffering, but a reminder that suffering is not the final word. He says, "When we see the pain of others, we are called to act, because the afterlife does not erase the need for compassion now." This view answers the distraction argument by making the afterlife a motivator for present kindness. The materialist critique also meets a response in the Jewish view of mystery. The sages often said that the soul is a hidden thing, like a wind that cannot be seen but can be felt. They did not claim to have scientific proof, but they offered a language that speaks to experience. The feeling of love, of longing for a lost parent, is described as a sign that something continues beyond the grave. This experiential evidence is offered as a different kind of proof. In the realm of education, teachers use the seed analogy to help children understand death. They explain that a tree's life began as a tiny seed, and that the seed's purpose is to become a tree. Similarly, a person's purpose may include a future growth that we cannot see yet. This simple story helps students accept loss while holding hope. The storybook analogy is used in sermons. A rabbi may close a talk by reminding the congregation that the last page of a life is not the end of the story's meaning. The lessons, the love shared, the values taught, stay in the hearts of those who read the book. The analogy comforts those who mourn, showing that the impact of a life lives on. Historical anecdotes add depth. One anecdote tells of a group of scholars in the city of Fez in the 12th century. They gathered to discuss whether the modern world brings many new questions to the Jewish mind. In the past, Jewish law and story gave clear answers about how to pray, how to eat, and how to act toward a neighbor. Today, secular ideas and a pluralistic society ask the same mind to weigh old teachings against new ways of living. This part of the story looks at how contemporary Jews meet those challenges. It brings forward the thoughts of Rabbi Abraham, Joshua, Heschel, and Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, and it follows two everyday scenes. A teenager who wants a career that does not match family expectations, and a neighborhood that must decide how to celebrate a holiday when many faiths live side by side. It also offers two common objections: that tradition blocks progress, and that secular values have taken the place of moral guidance. Two historic moments. Jewish involvement in the civil rights movement of the 1960s and the recent debate over conversion standards show how the past still talks to the present. The discussion ties back to earlier ideas about law, ethics, and identity that have already been explored. Rabbi Abraham, Joshua, Heschel grew up in a world where the old covenant still guided daily life, yet he also felt the stir of modern thought. He wrote that the world is not a neutral place, a line that reminds listeners that every choice carries moral weight. For Heschel, secular ideas were not enemies, but signals that the divine spark still moves in the world. He believed that the search for meaning could happen in a laboratory, a courtroom, or a protest march, as long as the heart stayed open to wonder. In his famous lecture on the prophetic imagination, he said that the true task of a religious person is to ask, what does the world need? That question still rings true when a teenager stands at the crossroads of family tradition and personal ambition. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who served as chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, often spoke about the covenant of responsibility. He argued that Jewish law, halakha, is not a set of static rules, but a living conversation that must answer the needs of each generation. He wrote, "The law is a compass, not a map, meaning that the principles point the way, while the exact route can change." Sacks also warned that a society that forgets its spiritual roots can become like a ship without a rudder. He saw secular ideas as useful tools, but he asked that they be anchored in a deeper sense of purpose. Both thinkers agree that Judaism can meet secularism and pluralism without losing its core. Their ideas form a bridge between ancient law and modern life. The bridge can be seen in the story of a 16-year-old named David. David grew up in a tight-knit community that prized study of the Torah and expected him to become a rabbi. Over time, David discovered a love for computer programming and dreamed of starting a tech company. His parents worried that the new path would pull him away from prayer, community service, and the family's expectations. David's dilemma echoes the tension between tradition and personal calling that many young Jews feel today. When David talked to his rabbi, the rabbi recalled Heschel's words about the prophetic imagination. He told David that the prophets of old were not only priests. They were also farmers, merchants, and artisans who used their gifts to serve the world. The rabbi suggested that David could see his coding skills as a modern form of building a better world. He reminded David of the story of King Solomon, who used his wisdom to build the temple and also to write proverbs that guided daily life. The rabbi asked David to ask himself how his work could bring light to others, not just profit. In this way, the ancient idea of using one's talent for the common good was reframed for a tech-driven age. David's family also faced a question of identity. They wondered whether a career in technology would make David less Jewish. The answer came from Rabbi Sachs' view that the law is a compass. The family looked at the principle of tikkun olam, the repair of the world, which is a core Jewish value. They saw that building software that helps people communicate, learn, or stay healthy could be an act of tikkun olam. The family began to support David, seeing his work as an extension of the same ethic that guided their study of the Torah. This example shows how a modern career can be woven into the fabric of Jewish identity, keeping the thread of law and ethics alive. A second scene unfolds in a mixed-faith neighborhood where a small Jewish congregation plans its Passover Seder. The building sits next to a church and a mosque, and the street is home to families of many backgrounds. The congregation's leaders ask how to honor the holiday while being respectful to neighbors who may not share the same rituals. Some members suggest keeping the Seder private, as it has always been. Others propose opening the doors, inviting anyone who wishes to learn about the story of liberation. The debate brings up the question of pluralism. How can a community stay true to its tradition while also engaging with the wider world? Rabbi Sachs' idea of a covenant of responsibility offers a guide. He taught that a community must balance its own needs with the well-being of the larger society. The congregation decided to host a Passover open house. They prepared a simple version of the Seder that explained the symbols in plain language, offered a shared meal, and invited neighbors to ask questions. The event turned into a night of storytelling, where the story of Moses leading his people out of Egypt was linked to modern fights for freedom. A Muslim family shared how their own tradition honors the idea of liberation, and a Christian couple reflected on the themes of sacrifice. The evening became a living lesson in how Jewish law can speak to universal values, while still keeping the distinct symbols that make the holiday unique. In both examples, the core ideas of law, ethics, and identity are at work. The law provides a compass that points toward justice and compassion. Ethics turn that compass into action, whether it is building a tech startup or sharing a holiday meal. Identity ties the actions to a sense of belonging, reminding each person that they are part of a story that stretches back thousands of years. Yet not everyone agrees that tradition helps in a modern setting. One common counter-argument is that old rules block progress. Critics point to the prohibition against driving on the Sabbath, for example, and claim that such rules keep a community from joining the wider economy. They argue that if a Jew cannot drive to a job interview, the community will fall behind. In response, Heschel offered a different view. He said that the Sabbath is not a punishment, but a gift of rest that restores the soul. He compared it to a battery that needs recharging. He argued that the rest day actually fuels creativity and productivity during the rest of the week. By seeing the Sabbath as a source of renewal rather than a barrier, the community can find a way to balance modern work with ancient practice. Another objection claims that secular values have taken the place of moral guidance. Some say that without the authority of Torah, society drifts into relativism, where right and wrong become a matter of personal preference. This worry often surfaces when schools teach ethics without reference to religion, or when laws are made without consulting religious voices. Rabbi Sachs answered by noting that moral guidance does not belong to any single book alone. He said that the great moral tradition is a tapestry woven from many sources, including the Torah, the Greek philosophers, and modern human rights documents. He warned that when a society discards all of those sources, it loses the ability to judge what is good. By keeping an open dialogue with secular ideas, Judaism can help shape a moral compass that guides the whole community, not just the faithful. These counterarguments illustrate the tension that many Jews feel today. They also show how the voices of Heschel and Sachs can be used to answer modern doubts. By framing the Sabbath as a source of strength, and by seeing moral guidance as a shared project, the tradition can stay alive while engaging with the world. Historical anecdotes give further depth to the discussion. In the 1960s, many Jewish groups joined the civil rights movement in the United States. Leaders such as Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Heschel famously said, "When I marched in Selma, I felt that the light of the Sabbath was shining on the streets." He saw the fight for equal rights as an expression of the prophetic call to stand with the oppressed. This involvement showed that Jewish values could be put into action in a secular arena, and that the moral voice of Judaism could help shape a broader social change. A more recent anecdote concerns the debate over conversion standards in many Jewish communities. Some authorities argue for stricter requirements, fearing that a lax approach will dilute the identity of the people. Others push for a more open process, hoping to welcome those who feel drawn to the faith in a pluralistic world. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs entered the conversation by reminding both sides that conversion is both a legal act and a spiritual journey. He quoted the Talmud, which says, "A convert who loves Israel is as dear to God as a native born." He suggested that the law should protect the integrity of the community, while the heart should stay open to newcomers. The debate continues, but the discussion reflects the same balance between tradition and modern openness that Heschel and Sachs emphasized. Analogies help make these ideas clearer. Imagine a garden that has been tended for centuries. The garden soil is the ancient law, rich and fertile. The seeds are the daily practices of prayer, study, and charity. New ideas are like fresh water that comes from a nearby river. If the garden only uses old water, it may become stagnant. If it only uses new water, it may wash away the soil. The best gardener mixes both, allowing the garden to grow strong and beautiful. This picture shows how Judaism can absorb secular knowledge without losing its roots. Another analogy compares a language to a living conversation. A language has grammar rules that keep it understandable. Over time, new words and expressions are added, and some old words fall out of use. The language stays alive because speakers adapt it to new situations. In the same way, Jewish law has core principles, but the way they are applied can change with the times. When a teenager like David learns to code, he is adding a new word to the Jewish conversation. When a community hosts an open seder, it is using an old phrase in a new sentence. The conversation remains vibrant because it listens to both the past and the present. The modern challenges of secularism and pluralism also bring practical questions about daily life. How does a Jew decide whether to work for a company that makes products conflicting with kosher standards? How does a community respond when a public school asks for a neutral stance on religious holidays? The answers often lie in the balance between personal conscience and communal norms. Heschel taught that conscience is a still, small voice that must be heard even when the crowd is loud. Sachs reminded listeners that a community's strength comes from its willingness to listen to all its members, even when they disagree. By applying these ideas, Jews can find ways to act ethically in a world that does not always share their values. Real-world applications of these ideas appear in many places. In Israel, public debates about the role of religion in the state echo the same themes. Some argue for a stronger link between law and religious courts, while others push for a completely secular legal system. The conversation often cites the principle of idina de malchuta dina, which means the law of the land is the law. This principle, found in the Talmud, tells Jews to respect the civil law of the country they live in, as long as it does not force them to break core religious duties. The principle shows how ancient law can guide modern civic engagement. In the United States, many Jewish schools teach both the Hebrew language and modern science. The curriculum often includes lessons on ethics that draw from both the Ten Commandments and contemporary human rights ideas. This blend shows how Jewish education can prepare students for a pluralistic world while keeping the moral core intact. The discussion also touches on how Jewish thought can help address global issues such as climate change. The concept of Baal Tashit, a law that forbids waste,